basically started when I was 7. My parents went to local koi store and bought a couple of koi for an aquarium, and it was winter time, and then we moved them out to the 125-gallon fiberglass pond outside. And not too soon later, it was deemed that we needed a filter. Obviously, that information wasn't given in the beginning, and we progressed and we ended up at Waddy's place in filtration. And around about 7, 8 years old at that time. After seeing Waddy's, it was a big surprise. You need lots of money to keep koi, and you needed huge ponds and so on. And I think it was in the year of 82, my father started building the first real koi pond we had. It's about 5,000 US gallons. So that was the first big interruption into the koi, and I guess that was about the time when I was 9 or 10. At that point in time, he became chairman of the Northern Koi section of the BKKS, and later went on to become the chairman of the whole BKKS. Throughout which time, I always had an interest in science and biology in particular at school. And later on, an opportunity arose as about the age of 16. One of the new koi people at the time, Pete Waterman, had opened up a business, and his main guy, Dennis Mitchell, had to go to a show, and it left a Japanese speaker with very little English, who he'd brought over, manning the store. So I was essentially asked to stay and look after the shop front for the week, and which I did. Unfortunately, I was asked to stay after that on a weekend basis, and that was my first delvings into koi dealership. So under the tutorage of Naoki Atsumi, who'd also learned from Menchan out in Tokyo, I was told some of the more interesting information regarding the bloodlines of koi and the history of koi. So from then, I completed 3.5 years in university studying aquaculture and various different elements of biology, and was offered a job. It was a 4-year course, but at 3.5 through it, was offered a full-time position as a manager of a new koi company. So it was a challenge and an opportunity that didn't arise very often. So, much to my parents' displeasure, left university, and that's how I ended up full-time as a koi dealer. Previously, leaving Pete Waterman's place, I was doing a weekend job for the same guy, Dennis Mitchell, in his first establishment. After a couple of years there, I moved to Cascade Water Gardens, owned by Dave Dyson, and that was a very interesting and educational time. And then an offer came through from Gordon at Springbank Koi. So he wanted to start from scratch and build a koi company. So that was the first real full-on time I had of building ponds, organising filtration and so on. And then Nigel Caddock phoned me, said there was an opening in America, would I be interested in going? At the time I had no real ties or family, so it was an opportunity not to be missed. Brief conversation with Joe, and a 1.5-day visit to Philadelphia made my mind up. So we stayed, and I actually entered the country in July, just after Independence Day, 2000. So at that point, the deal was I would be running a 3,000 square foot retail store, trips to Japan, and generally selling koi and dry goods. Within about 2 months of being there, Joe announced that he'd really like to own his own koi farm, and we started searching for properties. About November of 2001, we actually moved into the property. Joe announced one weekend that he'd bought a farm, and now we had to build it.
How you doing? Hey, what's up, man? You alright? Yeah, alright, good. Where's Davey?
Yeah, he's like,
Tell him it's a male.
it's a boy.
It's a boy. Congratulations, Dave.
Why would they want to kid you?
I don't understand that either.
Henry!
Oh, that could be where the cycling is. I think that's right there. There's a couple cycling here. No.
So for the last 4 or 5 years, we've essentially been contractors, breeders more and more through the years, but it's still not complete at this point in time. And I would think another 3 to 4 years before we could get it to a point where all the greenhouses and ponds are in place for us to actually use and fully operate as the koi farm. It's been enormously difficult at first. Our farm is basically a sandy lot. And we got very, very lucky when we excavated what we call the basin, the retention basin for the wastewater, because we hit, running laterally through the basin, was a great big clay slab of almost pure bentonite. So the sand created one problem. Obviously it doesn't hold water too well, but finding the bentonite was a godsend. The cost in mining it and backfilling it is almost equal to bringing in clay from another source. However, it just so happens that it turned into an ideal basis for raising koi. There are 2 or 3 different types of clay on the property, the main one being the bentonite base. But to the one side, we presume it's an old riverbed, and the one side is a light green clay and the other side is a dark green clay. And sporadically, even like a turquoise blue is found. And without real planning or anything, as the clay was mined, it was stockpiled. So certain ponds are made of more than one type than the other of clay, and they all behave differently. So whilst we do have a farm all in the same location, each and every pond behaves a little bit differently with respect to the different varieties. So in the future, and also what we've gained from the past, we're still determining which one is the right one for Sankey, for example, which one's the right one for metallic. And it'd be a big learning curve. Maybe in the next 30 years we'll get somewhat of a handle on it. But the difference to Japan, or the Japan that I've seen, I should say, Okayama mud is very different to Hiroshima. Hiroshima is very different to Niigata. A comment the other week was, where in Japan did you bring your clay from? I mean, it's funny in the fact of the expense, but basically everywhere in America and everywhere in the world has different soil contents. The one big thing we have to do, we built the farm from the fill dirt, the sandy fill dirt, and we lined it with clay, and then we, on the instruction of Sakai, put topsoil on the surface, on the bottom of the pond. And that was really to fertilize it, provide micronutrients for the algae growth, which then feeds the zooplankton. And what we've found is in the ponds where they were built and they were a little heavy on topsoil, it's a very spongy base, and we have to tread in the ponds frequently to release the gases that build up within the spongy base. The ponds that are more frugally lined with topsoil don't produce as much Daphnia, but don't require as much ongoing maintenance through the summer. It seems that the bigger the koi get, the deeper they root in the mud, and the less human intervention it is to keep them successfully. It's really in the first 12 weeks of life where almost on a weekly basis we spend 2 hours per pond treading in the mud and bursting bubbles basically. So production-wise, happy with Sankey in particular, based mainly on the parent stock that Sakai has allowed us to buy. And there's one pair of Sankey in particular that we call the rental that no money has exchanged hands yet, as there's no real price that could be put on that type of fish. So rather than that, Mr. Sakai will receive returns based on an annual collection basis, if you like, from the profit made from that particular fish. Kahaku is another one that I'm fairly pleased with at the moment, but we're always looking for new males to increase the quality of the stock. Showa is my favourite, but disheartening in the number of really good fish that come from the Showa line right now, and we've been changing parents every single year. So this, the year before last was a successful year, but last year the same female, all our eggs went fungus. So unfortunately we had to use a different female from the Matsunosuke line again, and over the next couple of years I plan to use a Sakai Hiroshima we have, and we'll also be mixing the Magoi blood from the Sankey into a Showa. So there's still a lot of work to be done in the Showa basis. The Asagin Shisuis, for me, is not as rewarding as the Gosanki, and the metallics, my favourite's the Kujaku, and it's something we want to work on. It's another line where we do have parents with the Magoi blood in it, so that's something we'll persevere with. We've been trying 2 different parent sets, and now we're at the point where we can cross 2 of the offspring together. So the Tamaura line is going to be crossed with the Magoi Matsunosuke line this next coming year. One interesting one we did this year was an Akamatsuba spawning with the view of getting Goshiki and Igoromo back from the origins again. It was an Akamatsuba that came again from the Magoi line from Mr. Sakai. So on telling him the plans this year, all we got was a smile. And as it turns out, we told him the results just a couple of weeks ago, and it's the same way he produced his Goshiki. So we cross male Goshiki and Kahaku back to the Akamatsuba. And at the minute, the Beni quality is such that I've never seen in baby Goshiki that we've produced ever before. So it's always the same way when you go back to the origins. There's not many good fish, but the ones that are good are a higher level. The best of the best, there is a difference, and there will be a difference. Right now, our 2-year-old fish are the ones I would say are the best quality we've ever produced, basically because we've changed the parent stock. The parents that we'd got when they were very young became mature last year, and we were able to use them. So at the top end of those, they are not big enough yet to do a real comparison size for size for large Japanese. However, they are producing some very, very good fish. On an average basis, every breeder produces a large amount of junk, a small amount of decent fish, and a very, very small amount of excellent fish. I'm not sure yet if any one breeder has reached perfection, and I'm not sure if we ever will reach perfection, but that's part of the fun of it, is the relentless pursuit of it. Every year it's a whole new breeding of fish, and we're all looking for that special fish. The problem with being a breeder is that you become very, very picky and dissatisfied with what a lot of people think is an excellent fish, but we're always looking for that little bit more. Can have a great quality and a great pattern, but the body might be a little lacking, or a great body and a great quality, but the pattern isn't what the judges will be looking for. So trying to tie everything together, with of course it being female, is one of the hardest things. I would say it's the same type of things that are everywhere in the world outside of Japan needs to be improved on. We're all kind of indoctrinated into the view that it's pattern basis. And very frequently, if the pattern's not up in terms of the sumi, or the Beni's not ready yet, excellent fish can be missed. So a lot of breeders bring good fish to koi shows to display what their wares are, and very often those same fish go home again, just because the market's not ready to view that type of fish. Tatigoi has been a used and abused word for many years, and people's interpretation of what a real tatigoi is quite a long distance from what a real tatigoi actually looks like. So there are a few hobbyist customers that have a very, very open mind and have bought koi as a young basis and are watching them develop and the changes. So I feel if the ownership comes, people learn a lot more rapidly than listening to a koi guru, let's say, that's also had years of experience but really only looked at a couple of hundred koi. So as a breeder with Spoilt, we get to look at tens of thousands of koi and learn from them every single year. Even in one pond it could be 100,000 koi. 99,000 of them will be thrown away, but you still learn from the ones that didn't make it as well as the ones that did make it. I think the problem is, again, in some of the hierarchy of hobbyists, in that saying you should never buy a male. My feelings are that 90% of koi keepers should only actually buy males. One, it's a lot better value for the money. You can get a much better quality fish buying a male for, let's say, $500 than you would do buying a female for $500. So at certain price ranges, you're going to get a fish that won't have ovarian tumours. It always maintains a relatively nice shape in the pond, and it's good on the pocket. The one other benefit is that males look prettier younger. And to buy a female tatigoi, we're buying a probability, a chance, and it takes a huge investment of money to buy the right one. And there are so few of those. Right now the male market is a little super saturated, and I would suggest definitely that's where people start to invest their money in. Even up to 24, 26 inches, if you can find a male with a female characteristic body, it could be perhaps the best fish to raise for long term. Depending on if we view just the quality aspect of it and treating the males exactly like we treat the females and keeping the best of the best of the best. Right now we have males from the first year on the farm, and so they would be considered Gosei right now, 4.5 years old, and they're still improving, and it looks like there's still 4 or 5 more years where they will improve before the colour starts to break and goes downhill. Now they're males specifically as parent koi. There are some males that we've sold in the past, very inexpensive price, $100, and they've carried on going on to shows 2-3 years afterwards and getting better and improving and winning awards. So I think there's a large window for certain males, anything up to 10 years plus, and there's a large window for certain females. The same aspect, there's a very small window for both males and females that are finishing. So if you take an open view, not looking at the pattern, but looking what's offered in terms of the softness of the skin and the longevity, both males and females can provide long-term pleasure for the hobbyist. Yeah, the harvest is, for us it's like Christmas. So basically every time we go into a pond, we've seen brief flashes through the summer. Feeding time, you might see the ring of the mouth, you might see a flash of a dorsal, swish of a tail, and speculate on what's happening, how big. And we're always terrible estimation of size because, you know, we like to think we're conservative, and it might be 14 inch and it comes out 18. But it's one of those nice things when you finally bring the net up and you see the girls, Tara and Jen, are predominant feeders on the farm. You see their hard work, and you see also our selection, whether it was the good selection, the bad selection, critiquing your own fish as they come out. All part of that's part of the fun. So even though it is hard work, we get such a kick out of it that you kind of shrug it off and worry about it after the weekend. But certainly this year has been a special year. 2005, like I said, was our first real good breeding year. I think then we used 12 parent sets and 16 ponds. This year we use 16 parent sets and 19 ponds, with the view that we'll probably finish up around about 20 ponds used for babies next year and just maintain that as a double cycle. The most frustrating thing is human error, and it's the problem. Some of it's tiredness and some of it's I'll get to it tomorrow, and then tomorrow's job a pump breaks. So, you know, whilst we try every year to raise the koi and put the best parents together, nature always seems to have a way of removing the best ones sometimes. So that can be very frustrating. Predation from birds is an enormously frustrating aspect to breeding koi. Having seen an osprey carry away a 16-inch premium Sankey, and a bald eagle then come and knock it out of the osprey's hands. So it's, you know, everything and everyone is eating the fish at all times. Again, a little location specific. Down at Momotaro's place, he's totally enclosed in nets, which is something I'd like to do in the long term. And you see the sea eagles there and the fish eagles. They're all swirling around, you know, so obviously he has had a problem, but he's at lower level land. Now up in Niigata, I rarely see anything more than a few strings over the ponds. You know, they get visited. I'm not sure if altitude is some aspect of that. But I think everywhere in the world there's different predation problems. And I think it's best to tackle it on your own farm and to try and make it work. Finance is always the biggest problem, because when it's the scale of a large farm, everything's expensive. It doesn't matter how small the job, it just becomes an enormous 5 or 6 figure sum. So finance is limiting in terms, and also energy levels and time available is very limited as to what you can get done on each year basis. We've always tried to hit the whole thing at once in the past, and it usually beats us. So the new method will be bite-sized chunks and trying to make it as perfect as possible for the amounts we can do. I'd like to produce a 1 meter Go Sankey. I mean, that's my real goal. Not just any 1 meter koi, obviously a 1 meter koi that will be suitable for show. Having the parents that we have, it's possible, but again, only if it lives and only if we manage to spot that one at a certain age. So it's a test of our skill every year to try and make that happen. Cross-combining different parents and so on, we're always looking for that body shape and that characteristic that could do it. So as I said before, it's more of an annual event that keeps us going. However, that doesn't pay the bills. So at the same time, we have to base a balance of making varieties that the general consumer wants and of a quality level to keep it high enough to compete with imports. So where our egos drive us towards Go Sankey, our common sense drive us more to the Hikari varieties and the Kawari Mono varieties. Most hobbyists during their startup process take a view of I want almost one of each variety. And at this present time, our distributors through the dealer network are limited. So it leaves us dealing with wholesale and retail. So we get requests and we try and fulfill the requests if they're reasonable. We do have a lot of parent koi of other varieties, some unused, some previously tried and tested. So over the next 5 or 6 years, we'll probably exhaust the ones we have on hand and then start crossbreeding to get some specific varieties almost exclusive to the farm. At some point, it's a level of surprise. There's always been the view that the Japanese would never release the real genetics. They release them continuously, basically, to hobbyists that buy koi. So the upper end of the hobby that goes to Japan, they certainly have bought koi through us and left them at the farm and let us breed from them. So it does give us the opportunity to surprise even the breeders that arrive at the level of koi that are being produced in America. It's a comment that I've heard with regard to several different breeders' fish over here in the States. It may go the way that Taiwan went a few years ago, where there is a lot more money coming into the koi hobby, and therefore there'll be a lot more progression on a faster rate. But for now, it certainly seems that Mr. Sakai is content. He's a very difficult man to please, so one fish will not do it. It will just have to be a continuous supply of good quality koi. The one thing he is light years ahead, even in his thoughts. He's thinking of using the koi that he currently has off the generations he has, whereas I'm just still trying to get my hands on those koi. So it's a difficult concept to ever think of selling back to them. However, you never know. It's something that we will persevere with. Sakai just bought 2 koi and gifted them to Agnes Khan. And they were from the Sankey line, from the special parents that we've got. Tongue in cheek, he says he'll sell them back to us as parent koi. So that may be more realistic.
Very well, thank you.